Well, good afternoon, everyone. We will be recording this workshop and we will email it to those who have registered. My name is Kevin Gunn. I am the coordinator of digital scholarship, and I'm joined by Charles Gallagher, reference and instruction librarian. Today, we're presenting on best practices for creating, displaying, and understanding visual data. Let's get started. So our agenda today is we're going to have an overview of data visualization. We're going to look at the components for bringing together a good data visual. Then we'll look at some of the types of data. The type of data you have will determine the visual you should use. And then we'll examine some common techniques for displaying data meaningfully. And then last, we'll look at some limitations and misuses of common techniques, what looks bad, but also the ethical dimensions to any visual. Of course, this falls under the larger concept of data literacy and how to read visuals properly. So probably one of the oldest proponents of good visual display is Edward Tufte. He brought data and design together in a print format. Much of what he wrote about is still relevant today. So good design is data and design working together. So to quote him, clutter and confusion are not attributes of data, they are shortcomings of design. So do you remember the 2016 presidential election? Well, this map was created and framed to demonstrate the dominance of the popular vote for Republicans. However, as many commentators have explained, this typical map shows geography, not people. While it is true that those large swaths of red throughout the majority of the US are correctly painted red, they are sparsely populated counties. The shape of the administrative geography drawn up, coupled with a particular symbol scheme, creates a map where red dominates in a visual way. It's not wrong, it's a particular truth. Many others exist depending on how the map is made. So could a more truthful map be positioned in the White House? Yes, of course, but that wouldn't speak to President Trump's narrative. So Kenneth Field did a website on the thematic maps of the election. So here's a screenshot of the website showing different ways to visualize the same data with different methods that give different perceptions. So a choropleth map is a thematic map that is used to represent statistical data using the color mapping symbology technique. It displays numbers reflected in geographical areas or regions that are colored, shaded, or patterned in relation to the data variable. So you see red and blue coming together there. Often we have the concept of purple, and you can see that with the chloroplast unclassed blended hue in the bottom right-hand corner, right over here. So I use this as an example of how you can represent data visually that would give you a particular narrative, but not necessarily the whole truth. So what is data visualization? Well, it's the combination of a computer, a collection of data, and the human being. Unlike with the printed work of Edward Tufte, with the rise of computers, you have a more robust, complex form of data visualization. Being cognizant of the interaction between the data, the computer, and the human being is important. You're not just creating a pretty graph or chart. You are specifically data acquisition, processing, and display lays the foundation so that human perception, memory, and cognition can be utilized. So given a data visualization framework, for data and computers, we have three layers. You have the data layer, which involves locating and obtaining data, importing data in the proper format, relating that data for proper correspondence, and data analysis and aggregation. The mapping layer involves associating appropriate geometry with corresponding data channels. It can also include data analysis and algorithms. And finally, you have the graphics layer. So this involves the conversion of geometry into displayable images and decorations and in managing interaction. So on the flip side, you have the human being as processor. So you have memory, visual, auditory, inputted into the cognitive and perceptual processors and outputted through the motor processor. So for memory, you have your long-term memory, which impacts your working memory, which involves moving memory data to your cognitive processor. So you have the memory moving to the processor. You have your eyes and your ears, the visual and auditory image store. This data moves to the perceptual processor. From there, the cognitive and perceptual processors combine the data and send it to the motor processor, and you then act in a particular way. So along these paths, different things can happen to you. So for example, if you are colorblind, you'll observe the world in a particular way. Another example would be the perception of an object that appears off in the distance, but it is in fact very close to you. So you have all these dimensions of the human being that can affect what goes into and what you see in a data visualization. And of course, we're familiar with optical illusions. So the pixels in the photograph can play an effect on our vision. So you see the color red, but in fact, the pixels are either gray or cyan. Illusions are science, but they're also art. How appealing a visual image is could very well be in the manipulation of your brain. It should be noted many components of data visualization employ illusions. So what exactly is the value of data visualization? Well, exploration for one thing. We can have numbers and columns and rows. What sort of story can they tell us? We can bring those numbers to life. Regarding explanation, we know the numbers and they suggest a story to us. We have tons of data, but how can we put it together coherently so that we can explore and explain? Data visualization helps us to see the relationships in the data that we would not otherwise see. So a data visualization should not distort. You must ask yourself, what is the motivation of the creator? Is it sharing, questioning, promoting, selling? These sorts of questions you have to ask yourself. And last, you have audience expectations. What does the audience need to be successful in understanding? How much detail is necessary? What are your cultural assumptions that you are making? What are the colors and icons that you are using? So generally speaking, there are three modes of visualization. There's presentation visualization, there's interactive visualization, and then there's interactive storytelling. So how you tell your story will depend on what made you use the particular graph that you're going to be using. So in this case here, if you're looking at let me just move that there. If you're looking at presentation visualization, this is more geared to, under user interaction, it's geared more to user-only devices. If you're looking at graphics rendering, it's pre-computed rendering. So you sort of do like a PowerPoint presentation, if you will. Something is done before you present. There's target. Who is it that you are addressing? Who's your audience? Is it colleagues? Is it mass audience? That sort of thing. And what's the medium? Is it a slideshow? Is it video? These are sorts of questions. What is it that you want to communicate to your audience? If you're looking at an interactive visualization, under user action, you're looking at, an aspect of where the user can manipulate the data to a certain degree. They can control what it is that you have, including the data set. It's in real time. The data is presented there and all that, but they can manipulate it in real time. It's usually targeted towards individuals or collaborators, and it can be software, standalone software, or it can be on the web. Now, last, you have interactive storytelling. And that is under user interaction. You have users can filter or inspect details of the present data set. So they'll have maybe different questions to ask. This will be in real-time rendering. So usually geared towards a mass audience. And the World Wide Web is probably the basic medium for transmitting this knowledge, but you can also use something like a kiosk as well. So let us look at let's see, 3 examples here. So here we have, we're going to look at 3 examples of these types of presentations, visual presentations. So we're going to use Johns Hopkins University data collections during the COVID-19 epidemic. So the first one here is a presentation. You notice it is static, it's visually appealing, and tells a story from left to right using color and size. So you have, first of all, from color, you have yellow, which is, there's no green with the COVID presentation. It's yellow and then moving to orange and then quickly to red. You have it divided into 3 areas, low risk, medium risk, and high risk. You have you have the size of the bubbles moving from left to right. So tennis, low risk, to night clubbing, high risk. So from here, from just visual look at, you can ascertain a number of different things regarding your risk. For interactive visualization, this one shows the confirmed COVID-19 cases per day. So the reader can manipulate the data source, the X and Y axes, and the location. And I did a screenshot of this particular aspect of it. So one can animate the chart to see the progression over time. So you can sort of tell a story from this and observe how that story took place, if you will. Now, the last one is interactive storytelling. So in this aspect here, you can manipulate and build one's own story from the data. So here you can select your own countries, and you can contrast the cases with the deaths and manipulate the axes here. So I just picked these random 5, but you can, if you want to know a story, you can take a look at, say, Southeast Asia, for example, and pick countries from there and then get a sense of that. You can sort of build your own story in that regard. Okay, so what is data? Well, the story you're going to tell will be dependent on your data to a large extent. So what is your data? You have to be familiar with it. Your data can consist of these data objects and actions. So what sort of quantities you have, the information, graphs, measurement, observations, facts and numbers, they can all play a component to what is your data. And from there, what kind of story you want to tell. So quick review. What are the types of data specifically? So you need to understand the types of variables you have. This understanding is important as it will determine to a certain degree the types of visualization that you'll use. So you have all these different, the main types of variables that you can have. And you can have thousands of different types of variables. So you have ordinal, data that has logical sequence, gold, silver, bronze, metals. You have categorical data, the different continents. You have nominal data that has two or more categories. So, but you do not have an intrinsic order. So something like shapes would fall under there. Do you have discrete data? That is numeric, that has countable number of values between any two values. So number of siblings, right? You don't have a half sister. You may have a half sister, but you don't have a half sister. You know what I'm saying? So you have discrete entities. You also can have continuous data so that it's numeric, but it has an infinite number of values between two values. So, your height between, being 5 foot tall and 7 feet tall, there's an infinite number of specific numbers that you can have there. So you have to look at your data and you have to see how it's represented. So an examples of these types is this particular website is A Night Under the Stars. And it is quite interesting. Let me do this. All right. Okay. Put together by Jordan Vincent. And what he did, he looked at US parks, and he wanted to look at the particular what sort of camping habits that people had with regards to that and when they camped and that sort of thing. So what he was looking at, so he looked at 4 different types of camp. Let me just, I'll play with my notes here. There we go. Okay. So he's looking at the 4 different types of lodging that you have here. RV, backcountry, that sort of thing here. And he was looking at those 4 types, and he was also put together the map of how many people were going, doing these types of accommodation. What were what time of the year were they doing this? And he also put in temperature. So, and he looked at the summer, and he represented it by particular temperature. You have 70, anything over 70 degrees was marked with a slight orange-red color here. And if it was winter, it was white. It's below 50 Fahrenheit, then it would be considered cold. So we looked at those with these different types of accommodation. So what's interesting, when you look at a particular image here, you can sort of ascertain, you can sort of guess ballpark, where exactly is this park located in the United States. So if you look at this image, you see the warmth, in that case represented by the red, going from, probably May down all the way to November or so, where it's above 70. So that sort of tells you a clue that it's not going to be North Dakota, for example. So you look at that. You can also look at the lodging, and you see that there's very next to nothing of accommodation for all of them except lodging. So people are coming in and they're staying at hotels and that sort of thing. And then when you look at the lodging, there seems to be more people during the summer than there is during the winter. In January, although everything is well represented here, there's definitely tourism all year round. So to consider this map, once you have all these sort of data clues, the location is Hawaii, and specifically the Hawaiian volcanoes that are listed there. So you get a sense of what that is. So let's take a look at a second example. Yes. So you have clues like here's the average temperature, and there are some accommodations available. So look at the red. It's year round. Well, what's year round? Something tropical, right? Look at the lodging. Lodgings represents the biggest one, right? And the second one is RV. And then tent and backcountry tell us that there's none there. So it's maybe that suggests that it's a small place that this occur, a small location that it's not worth doing any tenting or backcountry, that sort of thing. So this is an example of the U.S. Virgin Islands. So from this data, it tells us a story. So if you want to use this website, you can go to it and they'll have here listed mountains here. So it's really great. You can really compare something, different types of mountain locations, if you will. They also have other geographical regions such as tundra, desert, tropical, coast, and the continental Midwest. So there's a lot of information, a lot of data that is presented there that brings about meaningful information that you can look at. So another aspect of data are your dependent and independent variables. So another way of looking at data is through experimentation. Before we were looking at stuff through simply visualizing it and reading from that what sort of clues we can get. From with using dependent and independent variables, you're doing experimentation. So to review, a dependent variable is what you measure in the experiment and what is affected during the experiment. So in a scientific experiment, you cannot have a dependent variable without an independent variable. So an independent variable is the variable you have control over and what you can choose and manipulate. So it's usually what you think will affect the dependent variable. So how can these be represented visually? So if we're going to do an example, we could look at this, for example, very simple, straightforward one is how, stress affects heart rate in human beings. So if you look at the independent variable, that would be stress because we're going to manipulate that. And we're going to see how that affects the dependent variable, which is the heart rate. We manipulate the value, and how we do that is what is going to be measured. The output is what's going to be measured. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the x-axis. We're going to plot on x-axis, and then that will give us the components of what our y-axis will be. So it's still simple, straightforward here. What we're doing is in order to do the stress, you will, we'll lift weights and we would have the patients or whatever increase the amount of weights that they lift. So here we have, starting off with 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, it starts to go up. The heart rate of the person starts to go up. So we sort of say, hey, there's a correlation between between the two. So this is a very simple example, but it's a good way to look at the manipulation of your independent variable. All right. So in a So in the elements of a data visualization, you're going to bring all this stuff together. So you're going to have the title, you're going to have an introduction and citation, you're going to tell us what your measurements, your units, your scales and legends are going to be on there. You're going to have methods of visual encoding. And then you're going to have the various annotations of all that. And that's a lot of stuff I've just listed here, but that's these are the broad outline of what you're going to need in a data visualization that's going to be um, informative and a visualization that takes care of all the data that you have and that you're giving an ethical examination of um, what is in your data. So, and now I'm going to turn this presentation over to Charles, who will talk about some of the popular types of charts, and he'll also talk about some of the ways you can manipulate data unethically, and that you have to have a level of data literacy in order to interpret what you're seeing and saying, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't look right for whatever reason. So,
Yeah, thanks,
okay,
Kevin.
I'm going to
We go
now
ahead and
stop sharing. There we go.
you gotta let me share the screen. Give me
Oh, I'm
permission.
sorry. Uh,
I think, the COVID
there
graphics
we
are a perfect example of how data
there you go.
visualization can,
Mhm.
have real life implications. People were relying upon this to kind of easily grasp a situation. So this stuff has real life implications if it's not done correctly. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Do that and then give me just okay. So when looking at a data visualization, every data visualization is going to be a bit different, but there are going to be some common elements that Kevin alluded to. So kind of talking a little bit about it, most data visualizations will have either a title, an introduction, and a citation. The title introduces the infographic or the data visualization so the audience can grasp what data is being presented. An introduction may also be present to explain the methodology of what the chart or graph is measuring, and each infographic should also include some kind of citation to indicate where the data is taken from so the viewer can verify that the data presented is legitimate. Nowadays, with the advent of AI and it being used more commonly to even create data visualizations, and with the issue of hallucinations that can come up with incorrect or not real information, being able to track where the data is coming from is even more important than it has been before. So bear in mind that if you are going to use a data visualization, you should include where you're drawing that data from. The data visualization will also have measurements, units, scales, and legends. These are the elements which can help you understand the difference between data points. Measurements can be something as straightforward as the labels on the axis or a description of a particular segment. Scales can add clarity to measurements. For instance, there is a big difference between a bar chart depicting size in centimeters versus a bar chart depicting size in meters. The creator may also choose to include a legend. Legends tell the user what a particular dependent variable is, in case the infographics format may not make it clear. Third, methods of visual encoding. This element of data visualization is about the data itself. How is the data different, and what does the difference mean? The difference can be set up in various ways, including size, position on the infographic, or number of units representing that data, and we'll look at a few examples in a second. Finally, the creator may use annotations to draw the user's attention to specifically salient points of data. Reading annotations is good practice and a quick way to learn about important information. I should also mention that, though they may point you to a particular, point on their data visualization or their infographic, you should always look at the full picture too, because maybe there's something that is there that maybe the author is either ignoring or not realizing that maybe from your experience and your understanding, you can draw upon to come up with a different conclusion than the author. There are a lot of different ways to visualize data, ranging from the humble bar chart to the complex tree chart. We will highlight a few of the more common types of charts and why someone may use them and in what situation they may use them for. Our list includes bar charts, line charts, pie charts, scatter plots, nat charts, and tables. We'll start with the bar chart. When you want to compare and rank different forms of data, you may consider using a bar chart. You can set your independent variable on one axis and your bar length based on the dependent variable value. By the end, you should have a series of bars with varying heights based on the relationship with the dependent variable. In this example bar chart, we can see how it works. Each of the independent variables, such as energy, transportation, waste, other, and total, are listed on the x-axis, while the measurement of CO2 is labeled at intervals of 500 on the y-axis. Each of the bars represents the amount of CO2 emission each sector generated in 2006 and 2014. Looking at this chart, the user can quickly learn which sector has achieved the largest reduction in CO2 emissions and also see that the total emissions from all sectors has decreased over the 8-year period. The next we'll talk about are line charts. Line charts are useful if you're trying to show how a variable changes over time. The x-axis often shows the increasing change in time, while serves as the independent variable, while the y-axis shows how the dependent variable's value changes over time. Our line chart example, titled Global Surface Temperature, shows a different government agency's measurement of global temperatures over a 150-year period. As you can see, each line represents an agency's measurement of temperature. As the timeline increases year after year, the temperature rises and lowers in response. From the direction of the line chart, we might conclude that the global temperature has generally been trending upward over the past 150 years. Pie charts show a proportion of a whole. Each segment represents a proportion of a total, be it a line item in a budget or the percentage of a sample population that likes mint chocolate ice cream. And it always should add up to 100%, whatever your proportions are. In our pie chart example, we can see the different types of deferred maintenance at the Mount Rainier National Park. By looking at the data as a pie chart, we can easily see that paved and unpaved roads make up the highest percentage of deferred maintenance. Be aware that you should only use pie charts when the difference between each segment is obvious. Humans, as a rule, are poor judges of angles, and having like-sized segments can inhibit your reader's understanding. Consider another type of chart instead if the segments are not obviously different. Next up is scatter plots. The goal of a scatter plot is to place data points between two variables. You can identify clusters and trends which might indicate one of the variables has a positive or negative effect on the other variable, such as x increases, y decreases / increases. This kind of relationship is sometimes called a correlation. Our example scatter plot shows the weight and height of a sample of children. Each point represents the height and weight of a child. From the data presented this way, we can see a general upward trend. As height increases, weight increases, with most of the data points centered around 75 to 110 pounds and 58 to 65 inches. Based on the data and the chart, we may conclude that as a child's height increases, they're likely to weigh more. Nat charts show a change in a variable over time with the increase of an independent variable. So nat charts can be useful because it allows the creator to exhibit differences from both position and length. This kind of chart can be used specifically when dealing with a multi-phase project where the audience wants to know how long a phase of the project lasted. In the example nat chart, we can see the number of days that each phase took and how long it took to complete the entire project. So if you are working for a company and you want to see how far along a construction project is going, you maybe want to see how long it took them to, pave the parking lot, and then how long it took them to put up the structure, and then how long it took them to complete the electrical work and get it certified, and just kind of being able to break it down by, into different projects and length of time can help you understand maybe where your costs are going, better than just looking at like a bar chart that shows you how long it took you to complete the whole project. And finally, we have tables. Tables are a simpler way of conveying important data. Tables are useful when having a numerical representation. You can set the independent variables on either the horizontal or vertical sides of a table, then plot the data in relation to the two variables. However, instead of just listing numbers, you may consider using images to represent the change in the amounts, as we can see in the following examples. So instead of just telling us that the number of Smarties for green is 7, the author of this graphic included a picture of a Smartie to represent 2 Smarties. So it's more eye-catching and more interesting that way. When developing a data visualization, these are some core concepts to keep in mind. Number 1, know what your data is saying. Seems basic, but bear in mind the type of data you are presenting will determine the type of visual you will go with. Are you trying to show change over time? Are you trying to compare 2 different products, Or are you trying to show how much of your budget has been spent on pink flamingo statues? Knowing your data will help you make the right decision. Number two, know what your audience needs to hear. You will likely know the kind of people you are presenting to and what is most important to them. More than that, you should consider what your audience really wants to hear. Your coworkers may need a chart to track how long it took them to complete a project. Your clients might need a chart to understand how price trends on a given product has been increasing or decreasing over the last 6 months. Knowing what your audience is focused on can help you figure out the best chart to use. And finally, number three, know what you really want to say. Share your insights into the data. What do you think is important to let your audience know beyond what they are initially seeking? Answer their requests and provide your own insights as well. Having worked with the data, you might have an insight that the rest of your team is unaware of. Interested in data visualization but unsure of how to start? Check out the Data Visualization Catalog. This website contains information about different types of charts and graphs that you can use. Clicking on one of the icons will bring up basic information on the chart style and examples of how it looks. The site also has a functions category which links to other graphs that have a similar purpose. There are also recommended similar charts which might be useful. Finally, you can use the recommended tools on the right side to generate the visualization that you're looking for. Tools range from using coding skills to using Google Docs or Microsoft Word. So there are options available for all computer skills. Be aware that as convincing and useful as data visualizations can be, there are ways in which creators have manipulated their data and charts to mislead viewers. We'll cover some of the methods of manipulation. So first we have truncated axis. If we are looking at the bar chart on the left, we see that Library A has circulated far more books than Library B and Library C. What are Library B and C doing? However, if we look at the y-axis, we can see that the axis starts at 3,000 books instead of 0. This is called a truncated axis. Instead of starting at 0, the creator started at 3,000 to make it seem like the difference between the library's circulation history is significantly higher. If we look at the graph on the right, however, we can see that when you start at 0 on the y-axis, the difference between the library's circulation history isn't as large. There still might be significance to the may be significance to the difference, but now we have a better idea of how much of a difference it really is. Note that as far as we know, the creator didn't lie about the circulation numbers. It's just the manner in which the graphs are presented that has misled us. Next, we have a graph of a dual axis. By dual axis, we mean using two y-axes with one x-axis. In this example, the creator uses one y-axis to show the correlation between walking and endurance level, and the other y-axis to show chances of getting diabetes. We look at this graph and we see the overlapping lines and assume that there is a correlation between walking and chances of getting diabetes. Given that the two axes are using different measurements, it would be incorrect to believe there is a correlation, and yet on first glance, it seems like there is. If the creator is trying to show a correlation, they may be better off creating separate graphs and providing commentary or annotations. This is an old pie chart, and it's obviously wrong. Not only are the segments sized improperly, but the percentages add up to a far higher total than 100, which is not supposed to be the case. Pie charts should always accurately represent their segment size and add up to 100%. Limited scope. Sometimes you'll be presented with a small range of data which might distort important trends. For example, if you are only to look at the current graph for just the years of 1991 to 1997, you might see that there's a drop in 1993 and conclude that climate change is maybe a hoax. The temperature isn't going up as much as they claim it is. However, if you look at the data from 1964 to 2013, you can see that there's a general trend of warmer years more than colder years, and that the number of warmer years seem to be increasing as time passes. And this manipulation is called limited scope. You may draw incorrect conclusions based on how limited the data is. In this case, the creator could be clearer in how many bins are present or owned. For example, if this was being used to see how many households had trash bins, then a house which has one bin will be treated the same as a household which has 9 bins. Better to be more specific with your data and show the difference. A viewer may come up with an interesting insight because the infographic is more specific. In this example, the bubble sizes are disproportionate. While 70.2 billion is a much bigger number than 16.8 billion, the bubbles are still scaled improperly. In the following example, we can see that the bubbles have been fixed. The 70.2 billion bubble is still much larger than the other bubbles, which makes sense because it's a larger number, but at least the proportions are now more accurate. Both the square and the rectangle in this example have the same area size, but there's a big difference in how they appear. When you are creating data visuals, make sure to be consistent with any shapes. Using a different shape can confuse and distort useful information. How would the previous infographic with the bubbles look different if one or two of them were triangles instead of circles? Be a lot harder to compare them just at a glance, that's for sure. As we talked about with pie charts, humans are naturally bad at comparing angles. More than that, a graph like this isn't particularly helpful to comparing the segments when there are so many. The added tilt and third dimension also makes it even harder to understand what is going on in this graphic. For this kind of data, the creator may have been better off putting these numbers in a table. Remember, if there are more than a couple of segments with obvious differences, a pie chart may not be helpful. So in conclusion, data visualization can be used as an effective way to present data to your audience. This final visualization shows us the various parts that make up a good infographic. You need data, what you are presenting on, design to make the infographic attractive and interesting, shareability, easy for readers to understand and pass on to others, and a story, what you are trying to say with your data. Together with these elements, you can create an amazing infographic. We hope this presentation has been helpful and encourage you to try your own data visualization projects. Are there any questions? And I'll go ahead and show you our sources too. So if you want to take a look at those down the road, you certainly can. And we also have some additional readings that you can look at as well. So feel free to follow up with any of these sources for some more detail about creating a data visualization.
There we go. Thank you very much, Charles. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, I don't think we have any questions. So once the recording is made available, we'll send you a link to the recording as well as the presentation slides and that. So you'll have access to these links and you can go in and take a look. A lot of useful information. So, all right. Thank you very much, Charles. And thank you everyone for coming. And we'll see you in the next workshop. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Mhm.